In this video, I'm going to show you how I've built my drag lure machine for my dog. You'll need a transmitter and a receiver. I have a 24-volt battery plus charger and a motor. I also got this motor mount that you can put your motor on. This is the battery that I've used. And I also used this electric speed control. Then you'll also need line. I have 500 meters, a wooden block to put the motor on, your lure, and a spool. It's important that the hole of the spool is exactly 5.3 millimeters wide, so you can put it on the shaft of your motor. These are the exact measurements of my spool. You'll also need a threaded rod, a shaft coupler plus some grub screws, some washers that are M5, so 5 millimeters, some nuts, also 5 millimeters, screws to screw the motor into the mount, and more screws. This is the box I've used. I used a metal box because I like the size of it, but obviously you can also use a different box. This is how you need to wire everything. The battery needs to be connected to the receiver needs to be connected to the battery and the speed controller, and your speed controller needs to be connected to your receiver and the motor. And this is how everything should look like in real life. Obviously, you don't need a speed controller, but this is what happened to my setup when I didn't use one. It's because the motor used too much power, so the BMS, the battery management system of the battery, shut off and nothing worked. As we continued, we used this tool to make the wires of the battery more open, which is important to connect all the different parts. And then this step is really simple. This is the receiver. You just screw it open, you put your wires under, and you screw it back on. It's this simple. Please ignore the wires on the right side. These were originally connected to the motor, but then we had to change everything because we then used a speed control. So the wires of the motor don't actually go into the receiver, but they go into the speed control. We then prepared the wire for the motor. We first cut it open, and then my dad cut the wire to make the two wires inside accessible. And at this point, shout out to my dad. Without him, I would have never been able to build this whole lure machine. But yeah, he just cut it open and then he cut the axis. I think it's called isolation. He cut it off. And then we did the same thing that we did to the wires of the battery. We used this tool to make them more open, more accessible, so that we can connect it to the motor. We then used these flat plug-in sleeves and put it on to the ends of the cable, and then we used this tool to tighten it. It needs to be really tight so it doesn't come off. And then, of course, we did the same thing to the other cable. And this was probably my favorite part of the whole build. This is a heat shrink tube. You just put it over the flat plug-in sleeve on both of them, and then the magic starts to happen. So this is really cool. You can just use a lighter and heat it up, and then it just shrinks. It protects the end of the cables, and it makes everything look nicer too. And then you can just plug it onto your motor. Ours was a bit loose, so we then had to tighten it a bit. And don't forget to put a 9-volt battery into your transmitter. And then you can test out if everything is wired correctly, and if it is, it should work. I also tested the speed controller. Now that you've wired everything, we can prepare the box. This is the setup of my box. We need a hole in the back where the cable that is connected to the receiver and the antenna can go through. We need one in the front where the line can go through. And since my box was split into 2 parts and I had a wall between them, I also had to make a hole in the middle so I would be able to connect the motor and the spool. And then all we did was drill the holes. Once the hole in the back was drilled, I was then able to put the cable through that would connect the receiver with the antenna that is positioned outside of the box. Getting an opening in the inside wall of the box was a bit harder because we couldn't drill, but we used this metal sheet cutter to create the opening. Through moving it back and forth, we were then able to get it out. We also drilled 5 holes in the bottom of the metal box so we could screw on the motor from below that would sit on a wooden block. And then the last hole that had to be drilled was the one in the front where the line would go through. We then drilled a hole in this plastic thingy, and it's exactly 1 millimeter wide, so the line can fit perfectly through. And then we placed the plastic thing inside the box, so the line can go through. We also screwed the motor mount onto this wooden block. We placed it a bit behind so everything could fit perfectly in the metal box. Now everything just needed to be tightened real quick. And then we used our 4 millimeter screws to screw the motor in the mount. So in order to attach the spool to the motor, we used this threaded rod which has a diameter of 5 millimeters and placed it inside the hole which is 5.3 millimeters wide. We then used nuts and washers and put it on each side of the spool. Make sure to make it tight so the spool cannot move on a threaded rod. We then had to saw the rod because otherwise it wouldn't have fitted in the box. Then we used our shaft coupler, which fits perfectly on the shaft of the motor, and we connected the spool and the motor. And then you tighten everything by using the little grub screws and screw them in. We had the issue that the spool would get loose, so we would use one of those heat shrink tubes and place it around the threaded rod, and then it would fit. Here we just drilled in the wooden block that the motor was on. And then I just put my line on my spool. In the end, I tied my line to this metal clip, and the idea behind it is that you connect it to your lure and then your dog can grab the lure and the clip would come off, and so your machine doesn't get destroyed. And here I tested out the machine for the first time. And as you can see, it works.